With that, I'd like to welcome to the Coastside Fire Protection District Board of Directors Special Board Meeting, January 12, 2022. A roll call, please, Melissa.
President Gary Burke
Yes.
and Vice President Cockrell are waiting. Director Steve Stockman,
Present.
Director Cynthia Sherrill,
Present.
and Director Bruce McKimmey, you indicated as absent.
You will be absent this evening, had a previous engagement. Let's dispense with the Pledge of Allegiance this evening and go on to continuous business, redistricting the district. Chief Cox, would you introduce the subject?
Thanks, President Burke. As you saw in the staff report, this is one of 5 public meetings that must be held in accordance with the law for the redistricting. This meeting is really an informational meeting with the redistricting partners providing a short presentation about the process and to answer any questions. It's also an opportunity from any member of the public to provide their feedback as well. Again, this is the first of 5 meetings. 1 and 2 will be informational only. We anticipate the board needing to approve a new district map by April 17th of this year to go into effect for the November elections.
Very good. Let me suggest to my fellow board members and any public people who will be joining us that maybe we could hold our questions and comments and so forth until the end of the redistricting partners presentation, because they may cover some of the things we have questions on. With that, I believe the redistricting team is on.
Certainly. Well, thank you for having us this evening. If it pleases the board, I will simply go through our basic introductory presentation. It's a little long, it's a little dry. I'll do my best with it. Most of it, you'll just see me reading along with a slide in front of you. And for better or worse, our first 2 presentations are identical. This is mandated so that we don't have any content that could be missed by someone who could only attend one of the 2 first meetings. With that, give me one moment to start up this slideshow.
And I believe members of the board all have copies of the presentation. Is that correct?
That's correct. I believe it was forwarded to everybody.
Okay.
Standing.
So I would just ask you, I know we have to cover this, but we'll be reading along and we might read faster than you're speaking. So
Absolutely.
don't delay.
I will not slow myself down for anything. We can cover, if you have any questions or anything at the end, please let me know. If you feel the need to interrupt me, I will be more than happy to take a pause there, but otherwise I'm just going to go right through.
Thank you.
We are here to discuss the Coastside Fire District's 21 to 22 redistricting. This will be for this decade cycle. This presentation is going to cover a range of topics and discuss the technical aspects somewhat of the California Voting Rights Act, redistricting in general, the interactions of state and federal voting rights acts, the topic of gerrymandering, and then we'll touch a little bit on redistricting principles and the census data in this context. The CVRA is the California Voting Rights Act, and it is a state law that prohibits the use of at-large election systems in local governments if there is racially polarized voting. At-large is defined as anything other than a system in which an elected official lives in a district and is only elected by members of that district. Racially polarized voting is defined as differences in voting patterns, which can be shown to be correlated to race, religion, origin, or membership of a protected class. Protected class is defined rather broadly. The California Voting Rights Act takes principles of the Federal Voting Rights Act and expands them, specifically regarding district elections with 2 criteria. Federal law uses majority minority as the standard for vulnerability, whereas CVRA only requires what they refer to as ability to influence. The CVRA requires that plaintiffs in a CVRA case get full reimbursement for legal fees associated with any successful challenge. These fees can be lessened or eliminated if the district follows a specific strict and prompt process for converting to districts. Districting is the initial process of creating election district boundaries. These boundaries will determine the eligibility to run for an office. So a member must live within these boundaries to qualify for election within that district. And they will also determine who votes in the election. Only voters within a given district can vote for their member. This says council member. That is broadly used in our context to refer to boards, commissions, etc. These boundaries do not determine how the board decides to govern. The board can work as a single body. The board can work choosing to represent as a whole, even though they are elected by district. They are not mandated to only represent their district. The services between the district and the public, entirely up to the board's discretion on how those are managed. These district lines do not determine those things. They are administrative in nature and entirely at the board's discretion. Now we're going to get into traditional districting or redistricting principles in order to prevent the drawing of district lines from becoming a gerrymander. There's a number of criteria that are traditionally used and have been upheld by courts, and these are used nationally. They are relatively equal size of persons. Oh, hang on one second. They're relatively equal size of persons, not citizens, not voters, persons. They should be contiguous. They should strive to keep districts compact in both appearance and function. They should maintain what are called communities of interest, and they should follow local government lines where possible. So that would be cities, counties, whatever other local governmental organization is pertinent. In 2019, California passed a measure called the Fair Maps Act, which said that starting in 2020, cities and counties doing redistricting have additional criteria. You are not a city or a county. However, we use these criteria as a guideline because they provide us additional instructions and sort of state standards on things that are considered to be non-gerrymander districts, if that makes sense. We use these as a best practice. They create a process with a lot of transparency when conducting redistricting. They ask us to not use incumbency or candidate residence locations as a community of interest, and that we do not use districts to advantage a specific political party. These rules do not apply to community college trustee areas, which we call out specifically for community colleges, but that is also true of any special district, including fire districts, water districts. Any special district that is not a city or county is not bound to these rules, but we consider them a best practice. A community of interest can be defined in many different ways. It includes ethnic and language minorities and other groups. The Voting Rights Act specifically calls out three groups. Those are Latinos or Latine persons, Asians or persons of Asian descent, African Americans or Black persons. While race is considered a community of interest, it is not to be used as the predominant factor when drawing districts. In other words, you should take it into account, but it should not be your primary factor. We have here a quick overview of the Coastside Fire Protection District. This line is based on a series of maps that we've communicated with Chief Cox about and that we've worked on. The total population that we've determined for this district is 24,235 as of the adjusted 2020 census using the California statewide database redistricting data set, which would give us an ideal district size of 4,487 persons, about 4,500 people per district. This is a quick overview of those demographics. I'm not going to read through all of them. I feel like that would be a little bit tedious for everyone, but this, again, as public record, there are demographics and CVAP data available for this. And we can see here, if we overlay the city lines, the community lines in some cases here, we can see that you capture Montera, Moss Beach, El Granada, and Half Moon Bay. You are not capturing all of Montera or El Granada. El Granada was how we always said it when I was growing up, but I'm trying to be a little more fancy these days. We see that we go a long way down the coast into areas that are unincorporated, and that we have a lot of unincorporated areas along the along 92 there and along the hillside. Here we have a quick overview of the anticipated timeline for this process. You have your 2 pre-map hearings. Your first draft map meeting will be in February. Your second draft map meeting will be 1 month later in March, and then your adoption hearing will be in April. Our next steps moving forward will be to intake some of your priorities for drafting maps. We will not start until after the next meeting, but we can start hearing your priorities and we can start compiling those together now. Common priorities include things like city boundaries and neighborhoods. As you've seen, you only have the 4 cities to contend with there. We can definitely use those as a starting point. We're not sure how much splitting we'll have to do to maintain population balance, but that can absolutely be a context that we can use. If there are neighborhood boundaries that you have or can set for us below the city size, we can take those into account and use those as well. In February, we'll prepare for you 3 draft maps on which you can review and comment. You'll give us feedback on any edits. You'll give us feedback on places where you feel that we've met your goals or missed your goals. And we will then take that feedback. You'll pick the 1 or 2 of those 3 that you feel best represent your ideals and your targets. We'll take your feedback. We'll make amendments. We can do this a couple of times. Traditionally, we try and stick to 1 round of drafts, 1 round of amendments. We've had some agencies go a little longer and it messes up their timeline, but we can work with that. And then in March, you will get the second round of drafts. You can hopefully at that point pick one of those that you feel is closest to your goals. And if there are any amendments, you can still make them. You can make them up to 1 week prior to your final adoption, but you do have to have picked one and make no amendments for 1 week before you can adopt. Which means that in April, at that final vote, you will vote on a final map with no additional changes to make. And that'll be a wrap. Thank you for bearing with me through that rather tedious and dry presentation. Happy to answer any questions or take any feedback.
Thank you, Jacob. That's very fine. Members of the board, questions, comments?
Jacob, thank you so much. Do you have population numbers assigned to the definition of the cities or groups
do
that you
not.
identified?
We don't within the boundary of the district yet. We have not yet done that piece of the analysis. We are very hesitant in CVRA conversions to do any preliminary mapping or study until we've cleared our first 2 meetings, as CVRA effectively bans us from doing any draft mapping prior to those 2 meetings. So we try and be very cautious and limit our mapping to simply defining boundaries and starting there. And then we do our 2 preliminary hearings, and then we'll begin drafting and doing some real deep exploratory analysis. I can perform some of that analysis for you. I would be happy to take that in and provide that as something that can be posted and something that you can have available.
It just might be helpful to know how close each of these community boundaries correlate to the ideal 4,857 per district number.
Of course. And that's absolutely a part of what we start assessing when we start our drafting, is we start seeing how feasible it is to simply use communities as district boundaries. Again, our hesitation is entirely about not wanting to look at the maps too much. Because if we start playing with the maps too much, we start crossing into the territory that the California Redistricting Commission got into of, are they really not drafting yet? They started producing things they were calling visualizations. There was some debate among some people about whether those were actually drafts before they were allowed to begin drafting. And we just want to be cautious about that. So we have not yet out of an abundance of caution, but we can do that for you. Yes.
So with that, Jacob, say like in our example, the city of Half Moon Bay, are you able to move the lines around? And when you move those lines, say you wanted to move one area had a higher population, you wanted to divide it in half into two districts. As you move that line, will it show you how the numbers move within that?
Yes. As we move, so as we work, our system will be updating for us live as we work. So if we move a single census block, we'll see how it shifts the populations and demographics of all the districts around it.
And then my second question, in this process, in other redistricting you've done, is there a normal type of question that comes up?
Sure. Your fellow commissioner has already asked one of the most common questions, which is about community size within the district. That's a very common, very normal question. Other questions that come up very frequently are questions that we often refer to council about the necessity of conversion. We often get questions about which ethnic subgroups or protected classes you might have to contend with within your district. We know that within your district, the likelihood of creating a protected class seat is very small, simply because there is not a large and concentrated protected class population within the district. And that's not unusual for special districts. Special districts, particularly ones that are sub 50,000 population, it's very unlikely that we will find a protected class seat to make. And that becomes a part of our exploratory mapping, just to confirm that. But again, we tend not to touch that until after the first two presentations. Abundance of caution, that whole thing. The other piece that we sometimes get are questions about what additional information we can provide. So if there's anything additionally that you want to see, that you want to take into account during your mapping, let us know so that we can look into adding it to our process. We often get questions about neighborhoods. We often get questions about specialized population subgroups. Some places, I mean, you're just down the freeway from Daly City. It's a great example of an area where we get questions about the Filipino population, because they are a subgroup of Asian Americans, but they are not specifically going to always 100% overlap with Asian American population groups. So when we are targeting a protected class that is smaller than a normal census defined group, we go and we seek out the data and we try and make it possible for a board to draw lines that respect that subgroup. So if you have anything like that, doesn't have to be ethnic in nature, let us know. We can see what we can do.
Thank you.
Of course.
Steve, you have other questions?
No.
Phyllis? But I just have a couple of quick ones, Jacob.
Please.
I think you mentioned as an example, the El Granada as a city, but does El Granada and Point Montero, do they have absolute boundaries?
So it's a very interesting question. I use the term city interchangeably with what the census calls a census designated place. Something like 80% to 90% or more of the census designated places in California are incorporated cities. So they have incorporated boundaries. They have strict borders. With respect to Montero, possibly, I actually can't remember if Moss Beach incorporated or not. But with respect to Montero and El Granada, they're not incorporated. Yeah. Correct. So they're considered communities, and then those communities have their borders defined by the census according to a combination of things, including it's usually a preponderance of persons within a census block using the city name in their address. It's very interesting math how they define those borders. So there's a lot of self-definition that goes into those community boundaries if they're not incorporated. But please.
Related to that, I guess, is the
Mhm.
map that you have in the presentation.
Yes.
Is that the map of the territory of the Coastside Fire Protection District? Or is that some other map?
That is a map of the Coastside Fire Protection District.
And that map includes, you say 26, it said earlier, 26,000 people. 26.
24,235.
Yeah,
Yes. 24,235 persons.
I continue to think that's just low, but that's another thing. Then this next question, probably, I don't know if Gene is still on or not, but one of the questions I have that probably, Jacob, is not your bailiwick to answer is that we have two board members that were not up for election
Mhm.
this coming November.
Sure.
And how, and I don't want to get into a long dissertation, but at some point I'd like to see some kind of an explanation as to, assuming, for example, that one of these people ends up in a district that he's not up for election and he ends up in a district. Does that change anything, and how does it affect the other members of the board? I'd like to
yeah.
have, if there's an easy answer to that, fine. If not, I'd
There
like
is.
to have it in writing later on. Okay.
Absolutely. I'll do both. There is an easy answer, and we can write it into the presentation for next time so that we can really quickly go
Okay,
through it as well. The easy answer is it won't impact them. Their term ends when the term they were elected to ends. The longer answer is that we go through a process that's called acceleration and deferral. So voters will be chosen in this context when we assign district numbers, right? So once we create the districts, we'll assign numbers to these districts that match your seat numbers. And your seat designations will be determined based on where the greatest overlap between election dates exists. If that makes, I hope that makes sense the way I'm phrasing that. The idea is if a member would be up for election in 22, we'll assign them a number and a district that would be up in 22. And we do that assessment right at the end of the process. We do that after you've picked a final map, right before you vote for it. What we do is we do what's called sequencing, where we assign those numbers out. We do that by assessing acceleration and deferral rates, and we try and minimize those rates so that you are having the fewest number of people missing an election or getting an extra one. We try and minimize that. And what that should result in is the fewest number of persons being pushed from one election date to a different election date.
Thank you.
Of course.
I would like to, and I'm not sure who it would be, to see something in writing that would kind of outline that process, just so we
Happily.
know in advance. Okay.
Yeah, happily. Yeah, we have lots of boilerplate on it.
Okay. I'm sure you do.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Any other questions?
I saw one.
I have a question about the maps. Would
Of
it be
course.
possible, Jacob, to put up the map that you showed of the whole coast side, the district?
Sure. Yeah.
And
one
my
second.
interest is in the southern part of the district.
Okay. Give me one moment here to pull that back up. I'm actually going to, do you want to see that with the cities underneath or without the cities underneath?
Probably with the cities underneath. I'm
Okay.
on the map as I saw it, and I'm seeing it for the first time, but it shows the southern edge of Half Moon Bay, the city limits, but the actual Coastside Fire Protection District goes to Tenitas Creek. So
Okay.
this whole white area right there, that's all one district. Is that what you're?
Correct.
are
That
one
is
sub-
all. Yes, that is all within your current district. You do not have, so this is a place where the use of the word district to refer to your fire district and the use of the word district to refer to your area election or election areas gets very confusing. I would say that this black line represents the entirety of your jurisdiction.
Okay,
And when we get to the process of drafting maps, what we will do is we will draft sub-districts or trustee area districts, board member area districts, whatever terminology you prefer to use to refer to those districts, we will match. But right now, these maps do not show anything smaller than your total jurisdiction. So this shading is just to say this is approximately the border of Half Moon Bay.
okay. So the large white area on the southern end, that's one sub-district theoretical proposed possibility.
It could be, if you wanted to pursue that, it could absolutely be something we did, is we could
And
say
then
this is one district.
Right. So then number 2 is the browner area.
Again, the brown area is the city of Half Moon Bay.
Okay. And then there's a third delineation with the more olive green color on my screen.
Sure, and that would
Okay,
be
right
El
above that.
Granada.
Okay. And then the purple area.
Is Moss Beach.
Okay. And that leaves Montera up there at the top.
Correct. And these are not proposed district boundary lines. These are simply the existing community lines. That's all we wished to place on this map now was what those cities were, so you could get an idea of the area of the district at sort of a broad overview.
Okay. And the lighter green area between El Granada and Montera, what would we call that? And is that going to be a voter's district?
Yes, that is within your jurisdictional boundary. That
Okay.
is an unincorporated area. I believe actually that area is part of the Golden Gate National Recreation Area, sort of the extension of San Pedro Mountain, I believe.
Right. So it has a part of El Granada in it, and it may have part of Montera as well. So what we have here identified really are 6 areas, for lack of a better. Do I have that
Sure.
right? 1, 2, 3, 4,
You
5,
could
6?
absolutely, yeah, you could absolutely conceptualize it that way. Yes,
Okay. All right. Thank you.
of course.
And this southern end down here, mine's not a touch screen, goes down to Tanitas Creek, right?
Yes, that goes down very far south.
Right.
There is conveniently there isn't a place boundary here for us to identify with Tanitas Creek, but this is, I believe, I can't really zoom in on these too much, but I believe that Tanitas Creek is right around there. So yes, that is the area you're thinking of.
Okay. Thank you so much. This helps
Of
to
course.
clarify the
Excellent.
areas that you're looking at.
Excellent. Happy to help.
So this is JB. As I understand, I apologize for entering this meeting late, my bad. And I got on just in the tail end where you're discussing the people who will be up for election,
Yes,
I
sir.
believe in 2024.
Certainly.
And then you, as I recall, your statement confirmed something like that changes nothing. In other words,
Correct.
I believe Gary Burke said there'd be 2 individuals, which I suspect is me and Bruce. So that we would remain in place until 2024. Was that a correct understanding of my part?
If you were elected to serve, if your last election was for a 4-year term and it was in 2020, then your term ends in 2024. That doesn't change.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Chief Cox, did you have anything to add?
Only thing to add is the copy of this presentation is available on the website, the district's website. There's a special page for redistricting, as well as the news release that was sent out to the public to advise them of the 5 meetings, and that we will also be putting tonight's recording on the website. So if you get anyone from the community who wants to find out more, this is all publicly available.
Okay,
Outstanding.
Jacob, I'm sorry,
Oh, please.
Jacob, I have one wild question. We have a couple of areas that do not have resident populations, but have large numbers of people visiting there. I think, for example, of the Harbor District, which has,
Yeah.
few hundred boats and people in there at all times.
Constantly. Yeah, constantly.
And the other one is the Ritz-Carlton, which has hundreds of people in there.
Yep.
Is there any consideration in this whole process where those type of visitors are taken into consideration in defining the districts?
So there are 2 answers to that. The first answer I'm going to give you is the strict population balance answer, which is we balance based on population on the evening of April 1st, 2020. Census tells us that's what we use to balance population. That's what we use to balance population. They make those numbers for us. They tell us what those numbers are, and we abide by those numbers. We don't pretend that those numbers are perfectly 100% accurate. No process has ever acted as though those numbers are perfectly accurate to the exact number of persons that were at a given address at that time. It is the best that the census can produce. And that's what we use to do the population balance. However, when there isn't a population balance question at hand, for example, Princeton Harbor, you're not going to have a population problem to balance there in many cases because there won't be a large population recorded there. Then it becomes your discretion. You can say, we know there's a lot of population and a lot of risk here. We want to balance this against population that may be traveling, maybe visiting. So we may want to put the Ritz-Carlton in a district separate from Princeton Harbor because we want to balance that across 2 different board members' areas of oversight. But again, as established in sort of the administrative section, nothing about where we draw these lines has to impact how you choose to administer the district. These lines are at a base for making certain that a group of voters gets an elected representative from their own pool, sort of the way that you pick a jury from a pool of your peers. So the notion is simply that you are narrowing your districts to define voters and persons who can have a say in the elected representation for themselves. But that does not have to define how you divide your own services internally, how you manage your constituent interactions, anything like that. You can still manage all of that however you choose. And when it comes to non-populated areas that may have a visiting population, you can tell us how to divide those however you see fit, and we will do so.
Thank you very much. Any further questions? Then without
Wouldn't
any,
wouldn't a voter who votes for a single individual on a ballot have a reasonable expectation that that individual would be representing them as opposed to all 5? I'm hearing you say that technically all 5 positions could still govern on an at-large basis as we do today. But it seems to me like a voter who votes for a single individual would hold that individual accountable for representing them.
Sure. I think that is a philosophical question. And I hesitate to for lack of a better term, I hesitate to bloviate on it. I have a tendency to get a little bit expository on that topic. So I don't want to get too wordy about it. But the notion is that you we'll have a member elected by a specific group of individuals. That member can choose to still vote and act as a representative of the entire jurisdiction. That member can choose to act in what they consider the best interest of the entire jurisdiction. Philosophically, if they think it's in their better interest or the better interest of their constituency, of their sub-district, to vote and act in only that constituency's interests, then that is a philosophical choice of governance. That isn't a matter of law from our perspective.
So now I'm
And
going
it
to
is-
ask a question that is just so, probably so basic and so obvious. But you need one board member per each sub-district, right? On the theory that there will be 5 sub-districts at the end of the day. Is that
Yes.
correct? You want one?
Yes, that is
for
correct.
each?
Yes, it will be a
One-
one-to-one relationship.
Right. And that director needs to live in that district. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? Jacob, thank you very much. And without
My pleasure.
objection, we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thanks.
See you later.
Bye, guys.
Good night, all.